The sound of a slap is distinct. It isn't a thud like a punch. It's a sharp crack, like a whip breaking the sound barrier. In the dead silence of the classroom, it sounded like a gunshot, and I didn't regret it for a second. Welcome back, my fierce hearts and midnight dreamers. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our little dark romance family stretch across cities, countries, and time zones. Every click, every comment, every bit of love you leave here helps us keep unraveling these dangerous love stories and high-stakes betrayals together. So find your quiet place, dim the lights, and get ready. Let's begin. My hand was still stinging, vibrating with the force of the impact. It was a familiar sensation, one I hadn't felt since I walked out of the octagon 3 years ago. Back then, I traded blood-stained canvas for chalk dust and lesson plans, thinking I could leave the violence behind. I thought I could be normal. I thought I could be a role model without needing to wrap my hands in tape. But some people just beg to be hit. Mrs. Choi, the headmistress of Silverleaf Academy, stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek. Her eyes were wide, bulging with a mixture of shock and incandescent rage. She wasn't used to resistance. She was used to fearful children and fawning parents who paid tuition that cost more than my rent for a decade. She was a tyrant in a tweed blazer, and for the last 10 minutes she had been tormenting a child who couldn't defend herself. I looked down at Hannah. The little girl was frozen in her chair, her tiny legs dangling, not touching the floor. She was 6 years old, with straight black hair cut into a severe bob that hid her face. She hadn't made a sound. Not when Mrs. Choi screamed at her to read the passage aloud. Not when the class giggled. And not even when Mrs. Choi had grabbed her thin arm, digging perfectly manicured red talons into the soft flesh until the skin broke. That was the moment the switch flipped. I didn't think. I didn't calculate the fact that I was just a substitute teacher on day 3 of a 2-week assignment. I didn't worry about my resume or the Board of Education. I saw a bully. I saw a predator cornering prey. My body moved before my brain caught up. I had crossed the room in 2 strides, my weight shifting seamlessly, balance perfect. I didn't shove her. I didn't yell. I delivered a crisp, open-palmed strike that sent her staggering into the whiteboard tray. Markers clattered to the floor. You, animal. Mrs. Choi shrieked, her voice cracking. A bright red handprint was already blooming on her pale, powdered skin. Do you know who I am? I will have you arrested. I will have you thrown in the street. I stepped between her and Hannah, shielding the girl with my body. I didn't adopt a fighting stance, not explicitly, but I settled into my hips, hands loose at my sides, ready to snap up if she lunged. Touch her again, I said, my voice terrifyingly calm, even to my own ears. Touch her again, and I won't use an open hand. I'll break the wrist. The classroom of 20 elite 6-year-olds was breathless. They stared at me like I had just grown horns. Get out. Mrs. Choi screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the door. Get out of my school immediately. I'm calling the police. Call them, I challenged. I'll show them the bruises you just put on a 6-year-old's arm. She is mute. She is defiant. She refuses to learn. Mrs. Choi spat, stepping forward, her anger overriding her self-preservation. She raised her hand as if to strike me back. I watched the movement in slow motion. Her mechanics were terrible. Telegraphed. Slow. I could have slipped the slap, hooked her liver, and put her to sleep before she hit the floor. I braced myself, ready to dismantle the headmistress of Seoul's most prestigious elementary school. But the door didn't just open. It flew inward with a force that rattled the frame. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. 2 men in dark suits stepped in first, their eyes scanning the room with professional paranoia. They weren't school security. They weren't police. They moved with the predatory grace of apex predators. They checked the corners, checked the windows, and then split, creating a lane. Then he walked in. Park Ji-hyung. I knew the face, of course. Everyone in the city knew the face, though usually it was seen on the news in connection to urban development or shipping logistics. The tabloids called him the Prince of Seoul. The streets called him the Shadow King. He was tall, wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that fit his broad shoulders so perfectly it had to be bespoke. His hair was swept back, severe and dark, highlighting cheekbones that looked like they were carved from granite. But it was his eyes that stopped the air in my lungs. They were cold, devoid of any warmth, scanning the room like a general surveying a battlefield. The classroom went from silent to the stillness of a graveyard. Even Mrs. Choi seemed to shrink, her rage evaporating into pure, unadulterated terror. "Mr. Park," she stammered, her voice trembling. She tried to smooth her hair, trying to hide the red welt on her face, but it was impossible. We weren't expecting you until the assembly." Chi-hyung didn't look at her. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to the little desk where Hannah sat. He crouched down, ignoring the crease in his expensive trousers. He looked at his daughter. Hannah didn't look up. She was trembling, staring at her knees. He gently took her arm, the same arm Mrs. Choi had grabbed. He pulled up the sleeve of her uniform blazer. 4 crescent-shaped indentations, angry and red, marred the skin. One was bleeding slightly. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. Shi-hyung stared at the marks for a long moment. A muscle in his jaw ticked. Just once. It was the only sign of emotion he showed, but it was enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. That wasn't annoyance. That was lethal intent. He stood up slowly, towering over the room. He turned to Mrs. Choi. "Explain," he said. The word was soft, but it carried more weight than Mrs. Choi's screaming ever could. She wouldn't read, Mr. Park." Mrs. Choi babbled, sweat breaking out on her forehead. "I was simply trying to encourage discipline. The child is stubborn. She needs a firm hand. And then this woman," she pointed a shaking finger at me. "This substitute maniac assaulted me. In front of the children. She struck me across the face." Mrs. Choi seemed to gain a little confidence, sensing a way to deflect the blame. "It was barbaric. I was disciplining your daughter for her own good, and this woman attacked me. She is violent. Dangerous. I was just about to call the authorities." Chi-hyung turned his head slowly. His dark eyes landed on me. I didn't flinch. I didn't look down. In the ring, looking away is how you get knocked out. I held his gaze, chin up, shoulders back. I let him see exactly who I was. I wasn't a teacher in a cardigan. I was the fighter who had defended the weak. He looked me up and down, analyzing me. He noted my stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced. He saw the tension in my forearms. He saw the lack of fear. Most people crumbled under his gaze. I just glared back. He took a step toward me. The bodyguards tensed, hands drifting toward their jackets. "You hit her?" Chi-hyung asked. His voice was a low baritone, smooth like whiskey poured over razor blades. "She was hurting the girl," I said, my voice steady. I stopped it. "She is the headmistress," he noted, tilting his head slightly. "She's a bully," I corrected. "And I don't care who she is. If she touches the kid again, I'll put her through the wall." Mrs. Choi gasped. See. She threatens violence in your presence. Officer, arrest her." Chi-hyung ignored the woman entirely. He stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne, tobacco, and rain. He was close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his obsidian eyes. He looked at my hand, then at the bright red handprint blazing on Mrs. Choi's cheek. It was a perfect imprint. He looked back at me. There was no anger in his face. The coldness had shifted into something else. Curiosity? Calculation? He looked at Mrs. Choi, who was trembling with indignation, waiting for him to unleash his wrath on me. Then he looked back at me, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart hammer against my ribs. "Do it again." "I'm not a dog," I said, my voice flat. "And I don't perform on command." Mrs. Choi flinched, expecting the blow, her eyes squeezed shut. When it didn't come, she cracked one eyelid open, looking between me and the man in the charcoal suit with terrified confusion. The bodyguards flanking the door smirked, exchanging a glance that said they had won money on the outcome. But Park Ji-hyung didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just watched me, that terrifying calculation churning behind his eyes. He was testing the brakes on a car he was thinking about buying. He wanted to see if my violence was a chaotic impulse or a controlled tool. Discipline, he murmured, the word rolling off his tongue like a benediction. Rare. He turned his attention to the trembling headmistress. The shift in the room was palpable. If I was a threat to her physical safety, Park Ji-hyung was a threat to her existence. He didn't look like a parent anymore. He looked like an executioner who had forgotten his axe and decided to use words instead. Mrs. Choi, he said softly. Pack your things. Mr. Park, please, she wailed, tears finally spilling over, cutting tracks through her thick foundation. It was a misunderstanding. I have dedicated 20 years to this academy. You can't simply. I don't make mistakes, and I don't repeat myself, he cut her off. His voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the room plummeted another 5 degrees. You are fired. The board has already received my email. If you are not off the premises in 10 minutes, security will remove you. He took a step closer to her, his shadow swallowing her whole. And let me be clear. If I ever hear that you are working within 500 feet of a child in this city, be it a school, a daycare, or a library, I will know, and I will ensure you never work again. Anywhere. Do you understand? She nodded frantically, unable to speak, and fled the room. The sound of her heels clacking down the hallway faded into silence. Ji-hyung gestured to his men, wait outside. Close the door. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing the 3 of us inside the sudden vacuum of the classroom. It was just me, the Shadow King of Seoul, and little Hannah, who was still staring at her knees, though her breathing had slowed. Ji-hyung walked over to the teacher's desk, the one I had just cleared Mrs. Choi from, and sat on the edge of it. He crossed his ankles, looking entirely too comfortable in a room meant for phonics and finger painting. Sit, he said to me, gesturing to a student chair. I prefer to stand, I replied, crossing my arms. I wasn't going to let him tower over me while I sat in a kindergartner's seat. He studied me for a long moment, the silence stretching until it was thin enough to snap. He pulled a slim black tablet from the inside pocket of his jacket. He tapped the screen a few times, the blue light reflecting in his dark eyes. Imani Sinclair, he read, not looking up. Substitute teacher. Clean background check. No criminal record. Master's in Education from Seoul National University. Achieved via scholarship. He paused, swiping a finger across the glass. But that's only half the story, isn't it? Because teachers don't throw open palm strikes with perfect hip rotation. Teachers don't shift their weight to the balls of their feet when a threat enters the room. He turned the tablet around and slid it across the desk toward me. On the screen was a video. It was grainy, shot from the bleachers of an underground venue, but the violence was high definition. It was me, 3 years younger, hair braided tight against my scalp. I was in a cage, battered and bleeding, executing a perfect armbar on a woman twice my size. The Iron Orchid, Ji-hyung read the caption aloud. 12 wins, 2 losses. You retired 3 years ago. Walked away from a title shot. He looked up at me, his gaze piercing. Why? I didn't like the person I was becoming, I said honestly. It was the truth. The rage had started to feel too good. The snap of bone had started to sound like music. I left before I lost my soul in that cage. I wanted to build people up, not break them down. And yet, he nodded toward the door where Mrs. Choi had fled. The reflex remains. She was hurting a child, I snapped. Defensive heat, rising in my neck. I'd do it again. I know, he said. That is why we are having this conversation. He stood up and walked toward me. I held my ground, though every instinct I had was screaming that this man was dangerous. He moved with the lethality of a tiger in a silk suit. I have a problem, Miss Sinclair. I have a daughter who is targeted because of who I am. I have a house full of men who are loyal to me, but they are soldiers. They are blunt instruments. They scare her. He glanced at Hannah. The little girl was tracing the wood grain on her desk with a finger, lost in her own silent world. She needs a protector, he continued, his voice dropping to a confidential range. But she also needs a guide. Someone who can teach her, nurture her, but who can also break a man's wrist if he tries to grab her. I have hired nannies, they are too soft. I have hired bodyguards, they are too hard. You. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my hands. You are the bridge. You want to hire me, I stated, skepticism dripping from my tone. I want to hire you as her private guardian. You will live in my estate. You will oversee her education, and you will ensure her safety when I am not there. He named a salary. It was an obscene number. It was more money in a month than I made in 2 years of subbing. I laughed, a short, dry sound. I know who you are, Mr. Park. I read the papers. I know what you do. I left the fighting world to get away from violence, not to move into the headquarters of a crime syndicate. I am a businessman, he said smoothly. You're a mobster, I corrected. And I don't work for criminals. I'm sorry about your daughter, truly. She seems sweet. But I can't be part of your world. I turned to grab my bag. I'll leave my contact info for the police report regarding Mrs. Choi, but I'm done here. I took a step toward the door. Imani. He didn't shout, but the use of my first name froze me. Look at her. I hesitated, hand on the strap of my bag. I turned back slowly. Hannah had moved. She wasn't at her desk anymore. While we were talking, she had silently slipped off her chair and crossed the room. She was standing right behind me. Her tiny hand was gripping the fabric of my skirt. She wasn't looking at her father. She was looking at me. Her large, dark eyes were wide, filled with a silent, desperate plea. For the first time since I walked into this classroom, she didn't look like a victim. She looked like she had found an anchor in a storm. She hasn't initiated contact with anyone in 2 years, Ji-hyung said quietly. His voice was different now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, painful vulnerability that stunned me. Not even me. I looked down at the little girl. I saw the bruises on her arm where the teacher had grabbed her. I thought about the other Mrs. Chois of the world. I thought about the suits Chae-hyung would hire if I walked away. Men who would treat her like a package to be delivered, not a child to be loved. I felt the old fighter in me waking up. Not the one who fought for money or glory. The one who fought because she refused to let the bullies win. I let out a long, defeated sigh. I looked up at Ji-hyung, who was watching us with an expression that bordered on awe. If I do this, I said, my voice hard, I do it my way. I run her schedule. I run her lessons. And your men stay 10 feet back unless I call them. Ji-hyung buttoned his jacket, the mask of the Shadow King sliding back into place, though a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Welcome to the family, Miss Sinclair. The drive up the mountain took 40 minutes, winding away from the neon pulse of downtown Seoul into the suffocating darkness of the private estates. I sat in the back of the armored SUV, watching the city lights recede until they looked like distant embers. We didn't pull up to a house. We pulled up to a checkpoint. 12-foot steel gates, topped with razor wire, loomed out of the mist. 2 men with assault rifles slung across their chests stepped out of a guard booth, their breath pluming in the cold air. They checked the driver's ID, scanned the vehicle's underside with mirrors, and finally, the gates groaned open. Welcome home, the driver muttered, though he sounded more like a warden welcoming an inmate. The Park estate sat on a cliff edge, a sprawling monolith of concrete, glass, and dark steel. It was architectural perfection, brutal and imposing. It didn't look like a place where a family lived. It looked like a place where secrets went to die. When I stepped out of the car, the silence hit me. It wasn't the peaceful silence of nature. It was a heavy, manufactured silence. No birds, no traffic, just the hum of the electric fence and the distant crash of the Han River far below. The front doors were double-height glass, opening automatically as I approached. I walked into a foyer that could have swallowed my entire apartment complex. The floors were polished gray marble, reflecting the cold lead recessed lighting overhead. The walls were bare concrete, no family photos, no messy pile of shoes by the door, no warmth. I felt ridiculously conspicuous. I was wearing my favorite oversized red cardigan and beaten-up Converse sneakers, carrying a duffel bag thrown over one shoulder. In this temple of minimalism, I was a chaotic splatter of paint on a blank canvas. "Miss Sinclair," a voice echoed. I turned to see an older woman in a severe black uniform standing by a sweeping staircase. "I am the house manager. I will show you to your quarters." She didn't offer to take my bag. She didn't smile. She just turned and walked, her footsteps clicking rhythmically on the stone. I followed her deeper into the belly of the beast. My room was on the second floor, down a hallway that seemed to stretch for miles. She opened the door and stepped back. "Dinner is served at 7 sharp. Mr. Park does not tolerate tardiness. Hannah's room is 2 doors down on the right. Good evening." She left before I could even say thank you. I stepped inside. The room was beautiful, in the way a hotel room is beautiful. A king-sized bed with white linens, a sleek desk, a view of the dark forest pressing against the perimeter wall. But it was sterile. There was no dust, no scent of life. I threw my duffel bag on the bed, the thud the only real sound I'd heard in 10 minutes. I unpacked quickly. My boxing gloves went on the shelf. My sketch pads went on the desk. I paced the room, the fighter in me restless. I felt trapped. I opened the window, but it only tilted open 2 inches. Safety glass. I wasn't a guest here. I was part of the inventory. By 2 though am, the silence had become a physical weight. I couldn't sleep. My body was exhausted, but my mind was wired, alerting to every creak of the house settling. I tossed the sheets aside and pulled my cardigan back on. I needed water, or maybe just to confirm that I wasn't the only living thing in this mausoleum. I stepped out into the hallway. The lights were dimmed to a low amber glow. I crept past the heavy oak doors, my socks silent on the floor. I paused at the door the housekeeper had pointed out. Hannah's room. It was slightly ajar. I shouldn't have gone in. It was the middle of the night. But a gut instinct, the same one that told me when a left hook was coming, pulled me toward the gap. I pushed it open gently. The room was large, but unlike the rest of the house, it was dark. The only light came from a nightlight shaped like a moon in the corner. Hannah was awake. She was sitting in the middle of a massive, fluffy white rug, her knees pulled to her chest. She wasn't playing, she wasn't reading. She was just staring at the wall, her small body rigid. She looked incredibly lonely, a tiny island in a sea of gray. I didn't speak. If I said hello or go to sleep, she would freeze. She would retreat. Instead, I sat down on the floor near the doorway. I didn't look at her. I pulled a small notepad and a charcoal pencil from my pocket. I never went anywhere without them. I started to sketch. The sound of the charcoal scratching against the paper was the only noise in the room. Scritch, scratch, soft and rhythmic. I felt her eyes on me. She hadn't moved, but her head had turned. I kept drawing. I didn't draw a bunny or a flower. I drew a girl, but not a sad girl. I drew a girl with armor made of leaves and a sword made of light, standing on top of a mountain. After 5 minutes, I tore the page out. I didn't hand it to her. I just slid it across the rug. It stopped halfway between us. I went back to drawing. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Hannah uncurled her legs. She crawled forward, moving silently on her hands and knees. She reached out and took the paper. She stared at it for a long time. Then she looked at me. I looked back, keeping my face neutral. No pity, no demands. "She's a warrior," I whispered, breaking the silence. "Like you." Hannah blinked. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the paper. She didn't smile, and she didn't speak. But she didn't pull away. She shifted her position, sitting cross-legged on the rug, mirroring me. She placed the drawing on her knees and smoothed it out, treating it like it was made of gold leaf. For the first time since I met her, her shoulders dropped. The tension left her small frame. We sat there in the semi-darkness, 2 insomniacs finding a strange, quiet truce in the middle of a fortress. The West Wing office. Park Chi-hyung sat in the darkness of his study, the amber liquid in his glass catching the light from the wall of monitors before him. He hadn't slept in 3 years. Not really. Sleep was a liability. He swirled the whiskey, his eyes fixed on the screen in the center of the grid. It was the feed from the nursery. He had installed it after the first kidnapping attempt, And now, it was his nightly torment. Watching his daughter stare at the wall. Watching the trauma eat her alive while he stood guard outside the gates, powerless to fight the enemy inside her head. He had watched Imani enter the room. His hand had tightened on the glass, ready to summon security. He expected her to scold Hana. He expected her to try and force the girl back into bed, which always resulted in a panic attack. He expected the new guardian to fail, just like the 6 nannies before her. He watched Imani sit on the floor. He watched her draw. He zoomed in on the feed as Imani slid the paper across the rug. When Hannah crawled forward and took it, Ji-hyung stopped breathing. He watched his daughter, who flinched if a servant walked too close, who hadn't made eye contact with him in months, sit calmly next to this stranger. He saw Hannah smooth the paper out. He saw the way she leaned in, just an inch, toward the woman in the red cardigan. It was a crack in the ice. Ji-hyung set his glass down, the sound echoing in the empty room. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, his eyes locked on the screen. He studied Imani Sinclair's profile in the grainy black and white footage. She wasn't looking at Hana. She was giving the child space. She was protecting her, even from the pressure of attention. He felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was foreign, sharp, and dangerous. It was hope. "Who are you, Imani Sinclair?" He whispered to the empty room. He watched them until the sun began to bleed gray light through the heavy curtains. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel quite so empty. The house was a living thing at night, but it breathed too quietly. The silence in the Park estate wasn't peaceful. It was predatory. 3 nights in, and the insomnia was starting to feel like a permanent resident in my skull. I wandered the halls again at 1 a.m., my bare feet silent on the cold marble. I wasn't looking for Hana this time. She was sleeping soundly, clutching the paper crane I'd folded for her yesterday. I was looking for an outlet. My muscles were tight, buzzing with unspent energy. My body missed the impact, the sweat, the exhaustion that used to grant me sleep. I heard it from the east wing, a rhythmic, heavy thudding. Thump, thump, crack. It sounded like a pile driver hitting wet cement. I followed the sound down a spiral staircase I hadn't explored yet, pushing through a set of frosted glass doors. The gym was a cathedral of violence. It was larger than the commercial gym I used to train in, lined with floor-to-ceiling mirrors and filled with matte black equipment that looked like it cost more than a sports car. In the center of the room, Park Ji-hyung was destroying a heavy bag. He was shirtless. That was the first thing that hit me. A wall of tanned, corded muscle slick with sweat. His back was a tapestry of scars and ink, a sprawling, intricate tattoo of a Korean dragon clawing its way up his spine, its eyes red and furious. He wasn't wearing gloves. His hands were taped, but the tape was fraying, spotting with blood at the knuckles. He wasn't boxing. He was brawling. He threw a right hook that buckled the 100-pound bag, then followed it with a savage elbow. He was venting something dark, exorcising demons with every impact. I watched him for a minute, hidden in the shadows of the doorway. He was powerful, terrifyingly so. But he was angry, and anger makes you sloppy. He threw a left hook, winding up too much, putting his whole body into the rotation. The bag swung wildly. "You're dropping your left shoulder," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy panting in the room. "That opens your ribs. A counter-striker would put a knee through your liver before you landed that." Ji-hyung froze. He caught the swinging bag with one hand, stopping its momentum instantly. He didn't turn around immediately. He wiped his forehead with his forearm, his chest heaving. Slowly, he turned. His eyes were wild, dilated with adrenaline. He looked at me, standing there in sweatpants and a tank top, and the aggression didn't fade. It shifted. "You're awake," he said, his voice a rough growl. "Hard to sleep when you're tearing the house down," I replied, walking further into the room. I wasn't intimidated. This was my world. In the classroom, I was an imposter. Here, amidst the smell of sweat and leather, I was the queen. I nodded at his hands. "You're going to break a metacarpal hitting like that without gloves." "I like to feel it," he said darkly. He stepped away from the bag, turning his body toward me. He raised his hands slightly, palms open. You think my form is sloppy? I think you fight like a man who expects to win because he's stronger, I said, stopping 6 feet away from him. But there's always someone faster. He smirked. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a challenge. Show me. The air in the room instantly thickened. It was electric, charged with a sudden, violent intimacy. I'm not on the payroll to be your sparring partner, I said, though my fingers were already twitching. I wanted to hit something. God, I wanted to hit something. Consider it a performance review, he murmured. He didn't wait for an answer. He moved. He closed the distance with deceptive speed, throwing a testing jab at my face. It was fast, but I was ready. I slipped my head to the right, letting the fist graze my ear. I didn't back down. I stepped in. Too slow, I whispered. He swung the left hook, the one with the flaw. Just like I said, his shoulder dropped. The opening was massive. I didn't strike him, I wasn't trying to hurt my employer, but I tapped him firmly on the ribs with my fist. A warning shot. Dead, I said. Shi Hyung let out a low laugh, a sound of pure surprise. Again. He didn't hold back this time. He unleashed a flurry of strikes, pushing me back. I was forced to deflect, parrying his heavy forearms with my own. The sound of skin slapping skin echoed sharply in the empty gym. He was strong, incredibly strong. Every time I blocked, the impact rattled my bones. If he connected cleanly, he'd knock me out. But he couldn't connect. I was water. I wove under a haymaker, pivoted on my heel, and ended up behind him. I shoved him forward. He spun around, his eyes blazing. He was enjoying this. The brooding, cold Shadow King was gone. In his place was a warrior meeting his match. Stop holding back, Imani, he commanded, breathing hard. Fight me. You sure? Come on. He lunged. This time, I didn't slip. I met his force. I ducked under his guard, wrapping my arms around his waist. I used his forward momentum against him, twisting my hips and executing a perfect judo reap. The world flipped. We hit the mat hard. He landed on his back with a thud that knocked the wind out of him, and I followed him down, moving instantly into a full mount. I pinned his wrists to the mat above his head, my knees squeezing his ribs to lock him in place. Dead, I breathed. For a moment, time stopped. The silence rushed back in, but it was heavy now. Heavy with the sound of our ragged breathing. Heavy with heat. I was straddling the most dangerous man in Seoul. My face was inches from his. I could feel the heat radiating off his bare chest, burning through my thin tank top. A drop of sweat fell from my temple and landed on his collarbone. He didn't struggle. He didn't try to buck me off. He just looked up at me, his wrists trapped in my grip. His eyes searched mine, the adrenaline in them slowly morphing into something darker, hungrier. The violence of the spar had stripped away the walls between us. There was no boss, no employee, just a man and a woman, tangled together, hearts hammering in sync. My gaze dropped to his lips. They were parted slightly. Then back to his eyes. He flexed his wrists against my grip, testing my strength, but he didn't break the hold. He wanted me there. You aren't a teacher, he whispered, his voice rough, vibrating through my chest where we touched. I told you that, I replied, my voice shaky. No, he said softly. He tilted his head up, closing the distance until our noses brushed. You are too dangerous to be a nanny, Imani. The air crackled. The biological imperative to close the gap, to taste the adrenaline on his mouth, was overwhelming. My grip on his wrists loosened just a fraction. His hands turned, his fingers lacing through mine, gripping me back. The gym door hissed open. Sir, the secure line is... We froze. One of the security guards stood in the doorway, a phone in his hand. His jaw dropped as he took in the scene. His boss, the terrifying Park Ji-hyung, pinned to the mat by the new governess, half naked and sweating. I apologize. The guard stammered, spinning around so fast he almost tripped, facing the wall. The spell shattered. I scrambled off Ji-hyung, my face burning. I backed away, smoothing my tank top, my heart trying to beat its way out of my throat. Ji-hyung sat up slowly, He didn't look embarrassed. He looked like a man who had been interrupted right before the main course. He ran a hand through his damp hair, watching me with an intensity that made my knees weak. He stood up, towering over the room again. He didn't acknowledge the guard yet. He kept his eyes on me. Training. Tomorrow morning. 6 a.m., he said. It wasn't a question. I have to get Hana ready for school, I deflected, backing toward the door. 7 a.m. then, he countered. Don't be late. He turned to the guard, his voice dropping back to absolute zero. Give me the phone. I slipped out of the gym, the cool hallway air hitting my flushed skin. I leaned against the wall outside, closing my eyes, pressing my hand over my racing heart. I was in trouble. Real trouble. And it had nothing to do with the Mafia. She is not a prisoner, Chi-hyung. She is a 6-year-old girl. We were standing in the foyer. It was the first time I had openly challenged him on security protocol in front of his men. The air in the room grew thin. She is a target, Chi-hyung replied, buttoning his jacket. He didn't look at me, he was checking his watch. The estate is secure. The outside world is not. The estate is a mausoleum, I countered, crossing my arms. She hasn't felt the sun on her face in 3 weeks. She's withering. If you want her to heal, she needs to remember that the world isn't just concrete and fear. He stopped. He turned to look at me, his jaw set hard. He looked at the stairs where Hannah was waiting, dressed in her little coat, clutching the sketchbook I gave her. She looked hopeful. It was a small thing, but it cracked his resolve. Take the B team, he ordered, his voice tight. 4 men. 2 cars. You go to the Jade Garden. It's private, and if she gets so much as a scraped knee, Imani, I will hold you personally responsible. Deal. The Jade Garden was less of a park and more of a manicured slice of heaven reserved for Seoul's elite. It was a labyrinth of weeping willows, koi ponds, and walking paths lined with imported cherry blossoms. It was peaceful. Or it was supposed to be. I sat on a bench, watching Hannah. She was on a swing set, the only child in the vicinity. The 4 bodyguards Chi-hyung had sent were posted at the compass points, standing stiffly in their suits, wearing sunglasses that made them look like Secret Service agents. They stuck out like sore thumbs against the soft pastels of the garden. I wasn't wearing a suit. I was in jeans and a leather jacket, my hair pulled back in a loose bun. To the casual observer, I was just a nanny. Hire? I called out. Hannah didn't speak, but she nodded vigorously, her hair flying around her face. I walked over and gave her a gentle push. She swung forward, her feet kicking at the sky. For the first time since I'd arrived at the estate, I saw it. A smile. It was small, tentative, but it reached her eyes. She looked light. She looked free. I felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it almost knocked the wind out of me. I would burn the city down to keep that smile on her face. I stepped back, letting her swing, and scanned the perimeter. It was a habit I couldn't break. Old fighters never stop looking for the incoming hook. I watched the guards. They were disciplined. They were watching the main path, the gate, the perimeter fence. They were looking for the obvious threats. A car crashing through, a gunman walking up the path. But they weren't looking at the maintenance shed. It was 50 yards away, nestled behind a thicket of bamboo. A white van was parked there. A man in a generic gray jumpsuit was working on a sprinkler head. Most people would glaze over him. He was part of the background scenery. But I noticed his boots. They weren't work boots. They were tactical combat boots, laced tight for ankle support. And he wasn't looking at the sprinkler. He was holding a device that looked like a pressure gauge, but he was holding it up to his eye. A glint of glass. A lens. The hair on my arm stood up. He wasn't taking photos of the scenery. He was tracking the swing. He was tracking Hana. I didn't panic. Panic attracts attention. I checked the nearest bodyguard, Min-jun. He was looking the other way, scanning the entrance. Hana, I said, my voice calm but commanding. Come down now. Time for a snack. Hana dragged her feet, slowing the swing. As soon as she hopped off, I took her hand. Go to Mr. Min-jun, I said, pointing to the guard. Tell him I said to give you the water bottle. Stay right next to his leg. Do not move. Hana looked at my face. She saw the shift. The playful Imani was gone. The iron orchid was back. She nodded and ran to the guard. I turned and walked toward the bamboo thicket. I moved casually, cutting across the grass like I was just looking for a trash can. The man in the jumpsuit saw me coming. He stiffened. He quickly lowered the gauge and turned to open the back doors of the van. He was trying to stash the gear. I closed the last 20 feet in a sprint. He heard the grass crunch and spun around, reaching into his waistband. Too late. I didn't throw a punch. I grabbed his wrist, the one reaching for the weapon, and twisted it outward while stepping into his personal space. I drove my shoulder into his chest, disrupting his balance, and used the torque on his wrist to spin him around. He grunted, his knees buckling. I slammed him face first into the side of the white van. Don't, I hissed, applying just enough pressure to his wrist to threaten a fracture. If you reach for that gun again, I'll snap the radius. With my free hand, I patted his waist. A compact 9mm MR pistol. I pulled it out and tossed it into the bushes. Then I grabbed the camera he had tried to hide in the van. Let go of me. I'm maintenance. He shouted, though he didn't struggle. He knew I had the leverage. Maintenance guys don't carry heat, I said. And they don't wear $300 tactical boots. I keyed the radio piece I had been given. Minjun. Secure the girl. We have a situation in the north sector. The man tried to headbutt me backward, a desperate move. I sidestepped, let go of his wrist, and kicked the back of his knee. He collapsed. I drove my knee into his lower back, pinning him to the earth. I scrolled through the digital display on the camera. Click. The front gate of the park estate. Click. Chi Hyung entering his car. Click. Hana on the swing, zoomed in so close I could see the fear in her eyes from 3 minutes ago. Click. A shot of me. This wasn't paparazzi. This was a hit list. The bodyguards arrived a second later, guns drawn, swarming the area. They looked at the man pinned under my knee, then at the gun in the bushes, then at me. Minjun looked pale. He had been 20 feet away and hadn't seen a thing. Bag him, I said, standing up and brushing the grass off my jeans. I held up the camera. And get us home. Now, the office was dead silent. Chi Hyung stood behind his desk. He had the camera in his hand. He had been looking at the photos for 5 minutes. The 4 bodyguards, including Minjun, stood in a line, heads bowed. They looked like men awaiting execution. You missed a shooter, Chi Hyung said. His voice was terrifyingly soft. You were watching the gate, and you let a man with a gun and a telephoto lens get within 50 yards of my daughter. Sir, he was disguised. Minjun started. Crash. Chi Hyung swept a crystal decanter off his desk. It shattered against the wall. The guards flinched. The nanny saw him. Chi Hyung roared, his composure finally cracking. The woman I hired to teach her math saw him, while you were staring at the clouds. He took a deep breath, adjusting his cuffs. Get out. You are all suspended pending retraining. If this happens again, you won't be fired. You will be buried. The men filed out, shamefaced. The door clicked shut. It was just us again. Chi Hyung placed the camera down on the desk. He looked tired. He poured a drink from a different bottle, his hand shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a father who almost lost everything. He looked up at me. I was standing by the window, watching the rain start to fall. You saved her life, he said. I did my job, I replied. No. He walked around the desk. He stopped in front of me. Your job was to keep her happy. Saving her life. That is my job. And I failed today. You didn't fail, I said, meeting his gaze. You can't see everything, Chi Hyung. That's why you have a team. My team is blind, he muttered. He looked at me. Really looked at me. The sexual tension from the gym was gone, replaced by something heavier. Respect. Deep, terrified respect. How did you know? He asked. How did you spot him? He didn't fit the pattern, I said simply. And when you spend your life fighting, you learn that the thing that's going to hurt you is rarely the thing you're looking at. He reached out, his hand hovering near my arm for a second before he pulled it back. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me, I said, my voice hardening. Use the intel. That guy wasn't working alone. Find out who sent him. Shi Hyung's eyes darkened, the Shadow King returning to the surface. Oh, I will, he promised. And when I do, I will burn their world to ash. I am not wearing that. I pointed at the pile of tulle and sequins the stylist had brought in. It looked like a disco ball had exploded on a cupcake. It is the height of fashion, Miss Sinclair, the stylist sniffed. It's a fire hazard, I corrected. And I can't move in it. If I need to run or kick someone in the head, I'm going to trip and die. Get me something sleek. Something that moves like liquid. 2 hours later, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the master suite. The dress was blood-red silk. It was backless, with a halter neck that showed off the definition in my shoulders. It skimmed my body like a second skin, pooling at my feet, but it had a thigh-high slit on the left side. It was elegant. It was screamingly expensive. But to me it was tactical gear. I lifted the hem of the dress. Strapped to my right thigh, vivid against my dark skin, was a slim Kydex holster. Inside rested a carbon fiber spike. It was non-metallic, razor-sharp, and completely invisible to metal detectors. I wasn't a date. I was a weapon wrapped in silk. The door opened. Park Ji-hyung walked in. He was adjusting the cuffs of his tuxedo. He froze when he saw me. He didn't say a word. He just stopped, his hands dropping to his sides. His gaze started at the hem of the dress and traveled up, slow and deliberate, lingering on the curve of my waist, the bare expanse of my back, and finally, my eyes. For a man who usually looked at the world with bored detachment, the heat in his eyes was enough to scorch the room. Does it work? I asked, suddenly feeling self-conscious. He walked over to me, stopping inches away. He reached out and tucked a loose curl behind my ear. His fingers brushed my neck, sending a shiver down my spine. It works, he murmured. But I may have made a tactical error. What? I wanted you to blend in. Tonight no one is going to look at anyone else. The Seoul Charity Gala was held at the Grand Hyatt. It was a Shark Tank in black tie. As we stepped out of the limousine, the night exploded into white flashes. The paparazzi were a wall of noise, shouting names, demanding angles. Head up, Ji-hyung whispered, offering me his arm. Don't look at the cameras. Look through them. I took his arm. His bicep was hard as rock beneath the velvet jacket. We moved as one unit, cutting through the crowd. I felt the stares. I heard the whispers. Who is she? Is she a model? Is she new money? She's with the Shadow King. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of diamonds and fake smiles. Waiters with champagne trays weaved through clusters of men who controlled half the GDP of South Korea. We hadn't been there 5 minutes when the shark circled. Park Ji-hyung. A voice boomed. It was loud, jovial, and entirely fake. A man stepped into our path. He was shorter than Ji-hyung, wider, with slicked back hair and a suit that was too shiny. He held a cigar in one hand and a glass of cognac in the other. Mr. Kang, the boss of the Southern District, a man known for gambling dens and human trafficking, the kind of criminal Ji-hyung despised. Kang Ji-hyung acknowledged, his voice cooling to absolute zero. I didn't think you'd show, Kang smirked, his eyes darting to me. He looked me up and down, not with admiration, but with a lecherous, appraising sneer. It made my skin crawl. And I see you brought. Entertainment, Kang chuckled, gesturing to me with his cigar. Very exotic. Did you fly her in? Or did you pick her up from that club in Itaewon? I hear they have excellent hourly rates. The air around us vanished. I felt Ji-hyung's arm turn to stone under my hand. I saw his right hand twitch, the muscles in his jaw bunching. He was going to hit him. And if he hit him here in front of the mayor and the police chief, the truce would break. It would be a war. I squeezed Ji-hyung's arm, hard. I stepped forward, placing myself slightly in front of Ji-hyung. I didn't look angry. I smiled. It was a sweet, devastating smile. Mr. Kang, is it? I asked, my voice light and melodic. He blinked, surprised I had spoken. That's right, sweetheart. I've heard so much about you, I lied smoothly. Chi-hyung mentions you often. Kang puffed up, his chest expanding. Is that so? He knows who the real power is in the South. Oh, not power, I corrected gently. He was talking about your overhead. Kang frowned. My what? Your overhead, I repeated, tilting my head like a confused puppy. He mentioned that you spend so much money on flashy suits and imported cigars to distract people. It's a common psychological tactic for men who are deeply leveraged and insecure about their standing. It's called peacocking, I believe. The small circle of socialites nearby went deadly silent. Someone choked on their champagne. Kang's face turned a violent shade of purple. Excuse me? Oh, don't be embarrassed, I soothed, reaching out to pat his arm condescendingly. It's very brave of you to show your face here when your organization is bleeding market share. Most men would hide. But you put on a shiny suit and pretend everything is fine. I admire that kind of delusion. I turned to Chi-hyung, ignoring Kang completely. Darling, shall we get a drink? The air in this corner smells like desperation and cheap cologne. Chi-hyung stared at me for a split second, his eyes wide. Then a genuine grin, rare and dangerous, broke across his face. Led the way, he said. We walked away, leaving Mr. Kang sputtering, red-faced and humiliated in the center of the room. The whispers behind us had changed. They weren't asking if I was a model anymore. They were laughing at Kang. Chi-hyung steered me through the crowd and out onto the terrace balcony. He closed the glass doors, shutting out the noise of the party. The city of Seoul sprawled out below us, a glittering ocean of light. The winter air was crisp, biting at my bare skin, but I was running too hot to feel the cold. Chi-hyung walked to the railing, leaning against it. He looked at me, shaking his head slowly. You are terrifying, he said. He was a bully, I shrugged, leaning next to him. Bullies hate the truth. I was going to break his jaw, Chi-hyung admitted. I was 2 seconds away from causing an incident that would have cost me millions in bribes to fix. I know, I said. That's why I'm here. To protect the asset. The asset, he chuckled darkly. He turned his body toward me. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, softening the harshness of the Shadow King. He reached out, his hand sliding around my waist, pulling me away from the railing and into his space. The movement was possessive, undeniable. You didn't just protect me, Imani. You owned the room. He looked down at me, his gaze dropping to my lips. The memory of the sparring session rushed back. The sweat, the proximity. But this was different. This wasn't adrenaline. This was admiration. I have spent my life surrounded by people who fear me, or people who want to use me. He whispered, his voice rough. I have never stood next to an equal. My breath hitched. Is that what I am? No, he said softly, leaning down until his lips were brushing against my ear. Tonight, you are my queen. I closed my eyes, the word vibrating through my bones. My queen. It was a dangerous title. In chess, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. But she is also the first one the enemy tries to kill. Chi-hyung, I breathed, turning my head to face him. We were inches apart. The kiss was inevitable. It was gravity, but before our lips could touch, my phone buzzed violently against my thigh, vibrating through the silk dress. I pulled back, breathless. It was the emergency line, the one connected to the house. I answered it, my hands shaking. Miss Sinclair? It was the housekeeper. Her voice was trembling. There is someone at the gate. He says he knows you. He says he has something for Mr. Park. Who? I demanded, my eyes locking with Chi-hyung's. He says his name is Mr. Vance. And he says he has the security codes. The blood drained from my face. Chi-hyung, I said, dropping the phone, we have to go. Now. The morning sun didn't bring warmth. It brought a cold, clinical light that exposed every dust mote in the air. The estate was in full lockdown. The windows were shuttered with steel blast shields. The grounds were swarming with men in tactical gear. We were in the war room, a sub-basement bunker lined with servers and monitors. The air smelled of ozone and stale coffee. Park Chi-hyung sat at the head of the glass table. He was still wearing his tuxedo trousers and dress shirt from the night before, the collar unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up. He hadn't slept. None of us had. Standing across from me was Chief Han, the head of security. He was a bull of a man with a buzz cut and a neck thicker than my thigh. He had hated me from the moment I walked through the front door. To him I was a liability, a civilian playing soldier. "We found the source of the leak, sir," Han said, his voice dripping with grim satisfaction. He threw a manila folder onto the glass table. It slid across the surface and stopped right in front of Chi-hyung. "The breach didn't come from the firewall," Han continued, his eyes flicking to me with a look of pure venom. "It came from an internal device. Someone downloaded the patrol schedules and the perimeter codes onto a secure drive yesterday afternoon, and then they received a payment." Chi-hyung didn't touch the folder. He just stared at it. "Show me." Han tapped a command on his tablet. The main screen on the wall flickered to life. It was a bank statement, a wire transfer. Sender, Shell Corp traced to Kang Enterprises, recipient Imani Sinclair. Amount, 100 million won. Date, yesterday. The room went dead silent. The hum of the servers seemed to roar in my ears. My stomach dropped, but my face remained stone. This was a setup. A classic, clumsy, brutal setup. "It explains everything," Han said, stepping forward emboldened. "How she handled the guy in the park so easily. It was choreographed. A show to gain your trust. The scene at the gala? Theater. She humiliated Kang to deflect suspicion. It's the oldest trick in the book, boss. The Trojan horse." Han turned to me, his hand resting on the holstered gun at his hip. "You're good, lady, I'll give you that. But nobody is that good." I didn't look at Han. I looked straight at Chi-hyung. He was unreadable. The Shadow King mask was firmly in place. He was studying the screen, his dark eyes tracing the numbers. "Imani," Chi-hyung said. His voice was devoid of emotion. "Explain this." "I didn't do it," I said. My voice was steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I don't need Kang's money. And if I wanted to hurt you, Chi-hyung, I wouldn't need to sell codes to a rival. I'm in your house. I sleep down the hall from your daughter. If I were the enemy, you'd already be dead." That's exactly what a sleeper agent would say. Han shouted, losing his composure. "Sir, look at the facts. She's an MMA fighter with no teaching background who just happened to be in the classroom when you walked in. It's too clean. She's been working for Kang since day one. Give the order, and I'll take her downstairs." Downstairs. I knew what that meant. Soundproof rooms. Drains in the floor. I shifted my weight, widening my stance. If Han went for his gun, I would have to disarm him. There were 4 other guards in the room. I could take Han, maybe one other, but not all 5. I would die in this room. "Mrs. Choi," Chi-hyung said suddenly. Han blinked. "Sir?" The teacher, Chi-hyung murmured, finally looking up from the table. "The one you fired, Imani." "What about her?" Han asked, impatient. "We assumed she faded away," Chi-hyung said, standing up. He walked slowly around the table. "But people like Mrs. Choi, they are petty, they are vindictive, and they are desperate. If she went to Kang, she could have given him the layout of the school. But the codes? The codes for this house?" He stopped in front of me. He was close enough that I could smell the stale whiskey and expensive tobacco on him. He looked into my eyes. He was searching for a flinch, a micro-expression of guilt. I didn't blink. I held his gaze with the same ferocity I had in the ring. "See me," I begged silently. "See who I really am." "She humiliates Kang in public," Chi-hyung said softly, almost to himself. "She saves Hana in the park. She sleeps on the floor of my daughter's room because Hana has nightmares. It's a cover." Han insisted, his hand tightening on his weapon. "Boss, you can't be sentimental. The evidence is right there." Chi-hyung turned to look at Han. The look in his eyes was terrifying. It wasn't anger, it was disappointment. "You are a loyal dog, Han. But you are blind." Chi-hyung picked up the folder. He held it up for everyone to see. Then, he ripped it in half. The sound of tearing paper was shocking in the quiet room. He tore it again and again, until the evidence was nothing but confetti on the floor. "Sir?" Han gasped. Stunned. "This is fake," Chi-hyung stated, his voice turning to steel. Kang is trying to make me kill my best shield. He knows he can't get to Hannah while Imani is here. So he planted this. He wants me to do his dirty work for him. He turned back to me. I don't trust the paper, Imani. I trust the woman who stood between a gunman and my child when my own men were looking at the clouds. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My knees felt weak, but I locked them. He had chosen me. Against the evidence, against his oldest ally, he had chosen me. But sir, Han stammered, his face pale. If she didn't download the codes, then who did? The download came from inside the network. It had to be someone with physical access to the server room. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The relief vanished, replaced by a cold, creeping horror. Ji-hyung looked around the room. He looked at the servers. He looked at the guards standing by the door. And finally, he looked at Chief Han. Exactly, Ji-hyung whispered. Only 3 people have biometric access to this server room, Ji-hyung said, his voice dropping to a predatory growl. Me. Yuhan. And the IT specialist, Min-ho. Han's eyes widened. Sir, I would never. I know, Ji-hyung cut him off. You are too stupid to fake a bank transfer this complex. Ji-hyung turned to the monitor on the wall. Where is Min-ho? He called in sick today, one of the guards piped up nervously. He said he had food poisoning. Ji-hyung's face went blank. A deadly calm settled over him. He's not sick, Ji-hyung said. He's running. He turned to me. Get Hannah, take her to the panic room. Now. What about you? I asked, grabbing his arm. I have to clean my house, he said, his eyes hard. Someone let the rats in. The alarm klaxon suddenly blared, a harsh rhythmic wail that shook the walls. The lights in the bunker turned red. Perimeter breach. Han yelled, checking his tablet. Sector 4. The west wall. Min-ho didn't just sell the codes, I realized, horror dawning on me. He lowered the shields. Ji-hyung pulled a gun from under the table and racked the slide. He looked at me, and for a split second, the mask dropped. I saw fear, not for himself but for us. Go. He roared. I turned and ran. The world turned red. The emergency lights pulsed like a dying heartbeat, bathing the estate in crimson shadows. The alarm was a physical weight vibrating in my teeth. Go. Ji-hyung's roar was the last thing I heard as I sprinted for the stairs. I didn't look back. I didn't worry about the gunshots erupting in the foyer below. My mission was upstairs. My mission was Hannah. I took the steps 3 at a time, my lungs burning. I wasn't a teacher anymore, I wasn't a nanny. I was the Iron Orchid, and the cage door had just locked. I reached the 2nd floor landing. A figure stepped out of the shadows at the end of the hall. Black tactical gear. Balaclava. An MP5 submachine gun strapped to his chest. He wasn't a thief, he was a death squad. He raised the weapon. I didn't freeze. I didn't scream. I reacted. I grabbed a heavy marble bust from a pedestal to my right and hurled it. It was a desperate throw, but it was heavy. It smashed into the wall a foot from his head, showering him with plaster dust. He flinched. That was all I needed. I closed the 30 feet between us in a dead sprint. He tried to correct his aim, but I was already inside his guard. I slapped the barrel of the gun aside with my left hand, the hot metal searing my palm. My right hand drove upward, the heel of my palm connecting with his chin. Crack. His head snapped back. I didn't stop. I grabbed the strap of his rifle, yanked him down to knee height, and drove my shin into his temple. He dropped like a sack of cement. I didn't check if he was breathing. I grabbed the knife from his tactical vest, a serrated combat blade, and ran. Hannah. I kicked open the door to the nursery. The room was empty. The bed was unmade. The window was shattered, glass littering the rug. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. No. No, no, no. Hannah. I hissed, checking the closet. Empty. Then I heard it. A tiny muffled whimper. I dropped to my stomach and looked under the bed. 2 terrified eyes stared back at me from the darkness. She was curled into a tight ball, her hands over her ears. Hey, I whispered, keeping my voice steady, though my blood was boiling. Come here, baby girl. Come to Imani. She shook her head, paralyzed. We are playing a game, I lied, reaching out my hand. We are playing the ninja game. You have to be quiet as a mouse. Can you do that for me? She hesitated, then crawled forward. I dragged her out, pulling her small body against my chest. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. I've got you, I promised into her hair. I've got you. We moved. I carried her, keeping her head tucked into my shoulder so she wouldn't see the man bleeding out in the hallway. I headed for the panic room in the master suite. I rounded the corner. Contact. Second floor. A voice shouted. 2 men were coming up the service stairs, blocking the path to the panic room. Their flashlights cut through the red gloom. I spun around, clutching Hana tight. We were cut off. I kicked open the nearest door, a guest suite, and threw us inside. I slammed the deadbolt home just as bullets chewed up the wood frame. Splinters rained down on us. Open the door. A voice shouted from the hall. A heavy boot slammed against the wood. It wouldn't hold long. I dragged Hannah into the ensuite bathroom. It was marble, windowless, a kill box. Hannah, listen to me, I said, gripping her shoulders. I put her in the bathtub. Lie down. Cover your ears. Close your eyes. Do not open them until I say my name. Do you understand? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. She curled up in the porcelain tub. I stood up and locked the bathroom door. It was flimsy. It wouldn't stop them. I needed a weapon. The knife I took was good, but it was short range. I needed reach. I needed a distraction. I looked at the vanity mirror. I grabbed a heavy glass lotion bottle and smashed the center of the mirror. Shards exploded into the sink. I picked up a long, jagged piece of glass, shaped like a spearhead. I wrapped a hand towel around the base to protect my grip. The bedroom door crashed open. Heavy boots on the hardwood. Check the bathroom. Leave the woman. Take the kid. Take the kid. Something ancient and primal snapped inside my brain. The tactical calculation vanished, replaced by a white-hot need to destroy. I looked at the emergency light on the ceiling, the red lead casting the room in a bloody glow. I reached up and slashed the wire with the knife. The bathroom plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. I unlocked the door, and I waited. The handle turned. The door creaked open. Flashlights. A voice commanded. A beam of white light cut into the darkness. It swept the room. It hit the shower curtain. Clear left, the first man said, stepping in. He didn't check the corner behind the door. I moved. I didn't make a sound. I stepped out of the shadow, the glass shank in my right hand, the combat knife in my left. I drove the glass shard into the gap between the first man's helmet and his shoulder armor. It sank deep into the trapezius muscle. He screamed, dropping his rifle. I spun him around, using him as a human shield as the second man fired blindly. The bullets hit his partner's vest with dull thuds. I shoved the wounded man into the shooter, knocking them both into the vanity. Bottles crashed. Men cursed. I was a ghost in the dark. I dropped low, sweeping the second man's legs with a roundhouse kick. He fell hard, his head cracking against the toilet bowl. I was on him instantly. I pressed the cold steel of the combat knife against his throat. Stay down, I snarled, or I take the head. He froze. The first man groaned, trying to reach for his sidearm. I stomped on his wrist, shattering the bone. He passed out from the pain. Silence returned to the bathroom, broken only by the ragged breathing of the men on the floor and my own heart hammering a war drum in my ears. I stood up, wiping sweat and blood from my eyes. The blood wasn't mine. I turned to the bathtub. Hana? I whispered, my voice cracking. A small head popped up. She opened her eyes. She saw the darkness. She saw the bodies on the floor. She saw me, standing over them with a knife and a shard of glass, chest heaving, covered in red splatter. I dropped the weapons. I fell to my knees by the tub. Imani, I said. It's Imani. She didn't scream. She scrambled out of the tub and threw herself into my arms, burying her face in my blood-stained shirt. I held her so tight I thought I might crush her. I glared at the door, daring anyone else to come through. Let them come, I thought viciously. I'll kill them all. The house smelled of cordite and copper. I had cleared the ground floor. My suit was ruined. stained with the blood of men who had made the mistake of thinking they could take my kingdom. But I didn't care about the kingdom. I cared about the tower. Imani. I roared, sprinting up the main staircase, my weapon drawn. Silence answered me. When I reached the second-floor landing, I stopped. The hallway was a graveyard. But it wasn't the work of a firing squad. It was the work of a wild animal. One mercenary lay crumpled by a pedestal, his face caved in by a marble bust. Another was sprawled near the nursery door, his knee shattered, a combat knife missing from his vest. I stepped over them, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had hired Imani Sinclair because I saw a fighter in her eyes. I saw someone who could take a punch. But looking at the trail of bodies leading to the guest wing, I realized I hadn't hired a fighter. I had unleashed a Valkyrie. I followed the blood trail. It led to the guest suite. The door was kicked in. I raised my gun and stepped into the room. My world had narrowed down to the black circle of a rifle barrel. I was backed against the shattered vanity of the guest bedroom. My lungs were burning, each breath tasting of iron. Blood from a cut on my forehead was dripping into my left eye, stinging and blurring my vision. Behind me, huddled in the corner, was Hannah. In front of me, 5 feet away, stood the team leader. He was huge. He wasn't wearing a mask anymore. He had a scar running down his cheek, and he was smiling. He knew he had won. I still had the glass shard in my hand, but I was exhausted, and he had a carbine pointed at my chest. "End of the line, bitch," he sneered. "Let the girl go," I rasped, tightening my grip on the glass. "You want Park? He's downstairs. Leave the kid out of it." "The kid is the paycheck." He laughed. "Drop it." Chi-hyung's voice thundered from the doorway. The team leader didn't turn. He knew exactly where Chi-hyung was. He just shifted his weight, using me as a shield, keeping the rifle trained on my heart. "One step closer, Park, and I paint the wall with her," the mercenary warned, his eyes locked on mine. I saw Chi-hyung in my peripheral vision. He was standing in the doorway, his gun raised, his chest heaving. He looked wild, terrified. He saw the blood on my face, the glass in my hand, and the barrel pointed at my chest. For the first time ever, I saw the Shadow King hesitate. He couldn't take the shot. I was in the way. "Put the gun down," Chi-hyung said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I will let you walk out. Just let them go." "I don't think so," the mercenary smirked. "I kill her, I take the kid, and I walk out with a bigger bonus. Kang pays for heads." He adjusted his grip on the rifle. His finger tightened on the trigger. I saw the muscles in his forearm tense. I braced myself. I wasn't going to let the bullet hit Hana. I would take it. I shifted my weight, preparing to launch myself at him, even knowing I wouldn't make it in time. Click, the sound of safety mechanism disengaging. No, the scream didn't come from me. And it didn't come from Chi-hyung. It came from behind me. It was a sound like tearing metal, raw, guttural, and deafening. It was a scream that had been bottled up for 2 years, pressurized by trauma and silence, exploding all at once. "Hana." The mercenary flinched. His eyes widened, momentarily confused by the sudden, piercing noise from the mute child. The barrel of the rifle wavered, dipping just an inch. That inch was all I needed. I didn't think. I became the strike. I lunged forward, exploding from my crouch with every ounce of strength I had left. I swatted the rifle barrel to the left with my forearm. Bang! The bullet went wide, shattering the window. I stepped inside his guard and drove the glass shard upward. I didn't aim for the shoulder. I didn't aim for the leg. I buried the jagged glass deep into the soft hollow of his throat, just above the body armor. He gurgled, a wet, horrible sound. His hands flew to his neck, dropping the rifle. I didn't stop. I grabbed his vest and slammed him backward into the wall, driving the glass deeper, twisting it. "Don't touch her," I snarled, my face inches from his dying eyes. He slid down the wall, leaving a red smear on the silk wallpaper. He hit the floor and didn't move. I stood there, panting, my hand still raised, covered in blood. I stared at the body, my mind struggling to process that it was over. The adrenaline crash hit me like a physical blow. My knees buckled, Imani. Chi Hyung was there before I hit the ground. He kicked the rifle away and dropped to his knees, catching me. He didn't care about the blood. He didn't care about the dead man. His hands were frantically checking me, touching my face, my shoulders, searching for bullet holes. "I'm okay," I gasped, though the room was spinning. "I'm okay. Check Hannah." He looked past me. Hannah was standing in the corner. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was standing tall, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. She looked at the dead man. Then she looked at her father. "Daddy," she whispered. The word was rusty, small, and broken. But it was there. Chi Hyung made a sound that I had never heard a man make. It was a sob, ripped from the bottom of his soul. He reached out his arm. Hannah ran to him. He pulled us both in. He sat on the floor of the ruined guest room, amidst the shattered glass and the blood, rocking back and forth. He had one arm wrapped around his daughter and the other wrapped around me, pulling my head against his chest. I could feel his heart beating, wild, erratic, alive. "I have you," he choked out, burying his face in my hair. "I have you both. It's over." I closed my eyes, leaning into his warmth. The fighter in me finally let go. I wasn't the iron orchid anymore. I was just Imani. And I was home. She spoke. I whispered into his shirt. I heard. He wept, kissing the top of my bloody head. I heard. We stayed like that for a long time, a tangle of limbs and tears on the floor, while the sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The fortress had been breached, the walls had fallen, but the only thing that mattered was the circle we had made in the center of the chaos. Snow fell softly on the park estate, but the fortress didn't look like a prison anymore. The blast shields were retracted, letting the golden glow of fairy lights spill out onto the white lawn. The massive foyer, once a gray echo chamber, smelled of pine needles, cinnamon, and roasted duck. "Mama, look, it's snowing." The shout echoed through the hall, loud and uninhibited. Hannah didn't whisper anymore. She ran into the living room wearing a bright red sweater, her hair grown out long and wild. She pressed her face against the glass, leaving a smudge that the old Chi Hyung would have had cleaned instantly. The new Chi Hyung just smiled. I stood by the fireplace, watching them. The silence was gone, replaced by the chaotic, beautiful noise of a family. "Did you see the news?" Chi Hyung asked, handing me a glass of wine. He stood close, his arm brushing mine. "About Kang?" I took a sip. "The police are calling it a boating accident," he said, a dark glint in his eye. "Very tragic. He fell overboard, while wearing concrete shoes apparently." "Tragic," I agreed, clinking my glass against his. The threat was gone. The Shadow King had cleaned his house. He set his glass down on the mantel and turned to me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. He didn't kneel. That wasn't us. He stood tall, looking me in the eye as an equal. He opened the box. Inside sat a black diamond, sharp and dangerous, set in platinum. "I don't need a wife, Imani," he said softly, his thumb tracing my jawline. "I need a second in command. I need someone who can stand in the fire with me and not burn. I need a partner." He took my hand, his calloused fingers lacing with mine. "Will you rule this city with me?" I looked at the ring, then at Hannah dancing by the window, and finally back at the man who had looked at my violence and called it beautiful. I used to fight to survive. I used to fight because I didn't know how to be anything else. But looking at them, I realized the cage was gone. "Yes," I whispered, letting him slide the ring onto my finger. "I'll fight for this." And that, my fierce hearts, is where we leave the Shadow King and his queen. If you loved seeing Imani take the crown, drop a queen in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss a beat of our next dark romance. Until next time, stay dangerous.
Great story. It is so interesting how she transformed to fit in the Mafia's boss's word. Great romance.